The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Red Creek. The wind whistled a mournful tune as it swept through the empty lots, stirring up the remnants of a once vibrant town. Among the sagging storefronts and the creaking saloon doors, one building stood defiantly, its weathered planks stubborn against the unforgiving elements. This was Alice Hart's home, a modest dwelling that had witnessed the death of dreams and the birth of isolation since her husband, Jacob, had been buried beneath the earth, swallowed whole by the very land he had fought to tame. Alice stood by her front door, the evening light painting her silhouette in hues of gold and crimson. Beyond the threshold, her life was a constant echo of Jacob's absence, a silent prayer that the past would not come back to haunt her. But deep down, she understood that in this harsh landscape, survival often demanded choices with consequences far beyond her understanding. As she refilled her kettle of water, a movement caught her eye, a flicker of motion behind the tattered curtain of the old barn next door. Curiosity ignited within her, and she stepped lightly toward the barn, her heart beating like a war drum. What could possibly hide in such a forsaken place? Was it a lost animal, or perhaps something worse? As she pushed the door open, the scent of hay and earth filled her nostrils, a comforting smell that seemed out of place here. Yet, it was the small whimpering sound that sent an icy chill down her spine. "Who's there?" Alice called softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Silence met her words at first, stretching out like the distance between them. And then, out of the shadows stepped a girl, no older than 10, with wide, terrified eyes. Her face was bruised, the remnants of violence still fresh on her skin, and her clothes hung in ragged tatters, much like the life she had known. "Please, don't hurt me," the girl whimpered, her voice barely rising above a whisper. A fierce instinct to protect surged through Alice, igniting the embers of a long, dormant courage. She crouched down, placing herself at eye level to the trembling child. "Why would I hurt you?" Alice asked, genuinely perplexed. Were not all children born to be nurtured instead of feared? Were not the promises of motherhood and care universal, even in a world where harshness reigned? The girl scanned the surroundings before glancing back at Alice, desperation etched into her small features. "They'll find me," she said, the tremor in her voice betraying the gravity of her confession. Determined to shield this fragile soul from the storm that threatened her, Alice knew she had to act quickly. She reached out a hand, inviting the girl into the safety of her home, her heart pounding with the weight of an unspoken promise. But as the girl took a hesitant step forward, a thunder rumbled in the distance, signaling danger that loomed closer. A dark storm brewing not just in the sky, but within the very hearts of men. Would Alice's choice to protect this girl cost her everything? In the blistering heat of midday, dust swirled along the main road of Silver Creek, a ghostly dance stirred by the restless wind. The widow, Clara Grayson, stood on her porch, the sun casting long shadows across her weathered face. She had known this moment would come. She could feel the tension in the very air she breathed. As if summoned by her thoughts, the rumble of hoofbeats echoed in the distance, a low growl of thunder announcing the arrival of her late husband's brothers. They had come to reclaim not just the land, but the honor they believed had been sullied by her widowhood. Clara's grip tightened around the hand-carved railing, its rough texture a reminder of the life she had built with her husband, a life now teetering on the brink of collapse. Her heart raced as she scanned the horizon, and with each passing second, the thud of horse hooves grew louder, resonating like a war drum echoing through her past. After the funeral, she had buried more than just her husband. She had buried the last remnants of peace she thought she could hold. Would they come to claim their brother's things, or would they come for her? The three figures approached, tall and imposing, dark hats casting shadows across their faces. She recognized them instantly. Even the way they sat their horses told her they were brothers, blood-tied and stubborn as the stone walls of Viking fortresses. She had seen their kind before, strong and unyielding, yet she had learned to wield her own strength beneath her soft exterior, a strength hardened by loss and solitude. "Clara," the eldest called out, his voice a low rumble, the kind that could split wood. "We need to talk." The townsfolk paused in their chores, heads turning to witness the impending confrontation. Clara felt their eyes on her, heavy with judgment and curiosity. She knew the whispers would follow her long after this encounter. Did they think her guilty? Did they believe she had betrayed her marriage vows by keeping secrets? As they dismounted, their boots hit the ground with a finality that sent shivers down her spine. She stood taller, refusing to let fear crack her resolve. This land bore witness to her husband's dreams, and she would not let it slip away without a fight. Yet doubts crept in, gnawing at her like hungry wolves. What did these men truly want? Was it her loyalty they sought, or something far more sinister? Clara met their eyes, steeling herself for the storm to come. She wouldn't let them take what was hers, not without a struggle. But as they approached, her heart raced with a question that echoed in her mind. How far would she go to protect her fragile sanctuary? The tension in the air thickened, a palpable weight that hung over them all like the blade of a Viking sword, quivering in anticipation of the first strike. And as the brothers stepped closer, Clara felt the ground beneath her shift, as if the very earth was waiting for her answer. Would she stand her ground, or was she already in too deep? The sun dipped low in the sky, a molten orb casting golden hues across the widow's modest cabin nestled at the edge of the sprawling prairie. Inside, the air hung heavy with the smell of dust and the faint sweetness of wildflowers, remnants of a life once filled with laughter and love. At a rough-hewn table, Mary, the widow, sat across from the girl, who had quietly slipped into her life seeking refuge. Her fingers moved nervously along the grain of the wood, tracing scars left by years of weather and time. "Do you believe in mercy?" Mary asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though the question itself could draw unwanted attention from the world outside. The girl, barely older than 12, looked up with wide eyes, dark and deep like the endless night sky. "What does it matter?" she replied, a hint of bitterness lacing her tone. "Out here, mercy ain't much different from weakness." They exchanged stories over the fading light, each revelation pulling back layers of hurt and fear that clung to their souls like the dust to their boots. Mary spoke of her husband, a man who once carried a laughter that filled the spaces of their home. She recounted the day he left, the weight of his absence settling heavily in her heart. Each word was a nail driven into the silence that had enveloped her since his departure. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the girl, searching for understanding, for a kindred spirit in shared grief. The girl's response came slowly, as if she were pulling memories from a well too deep to fathom. "I thought I'd always be safe, that my skin would protect me." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, the strength she wore like armor seemed to falter. But safety is a lie told by people who don't know fear. Mary reached across the table, her hand hovering before the girl's as if afraid to break the fragile connection between them. In that moment, they were no longer just a widow and a beaten child. They were two survivors in a world that had forgotten the meaning of compassion. A moment of shared silence lingered, charged with unsaid words, until the girl spoke again, her voice steadier. "Sometimes, I wish I could just forget. Forget everything." The weight of their confessions hung in the air, heavier than the oppressive heat that pressed in from outside. Mary's heart ached as she studied the girl's face, the bruises hidden beneath the surface telling tales of battles fought with no victor. Could both of them find the strength to heal? Or was their pain too deeply entangled in the fabric of their lives? But as dusk settled around them, enveloping the cabin in shadows, neither could shake the question. How do you bury a truth that could set you free? A crack of thunder rolled across the darkened sky, the calm before a storm that mirrored the tension simmering between the widow, Eliza, and her late husband's brothers. The air was thick with unspoken threats as they stood on her porch, their silhouettes stark against the flickering candlelight inside. The wind howled, sending gusts of dust swirling around them, each grain a reminder of the desolate land they all claimed to share. Eliza clutched the doorframe, her knuckles white against the rough wood. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of fear. Did they see her as just a woman? Or did they recognize the fire that burned beneath her skin? The brothers exchanged glances, their faces a mask of hostility, eyes glinting like sharpened iron. "We want our brother's girl," growled Jacob, the eldest, his jaw set tight. "She's got the blood of our kin running through her veins, and you're hiding her like a thief in the night." The way he spat the words felt like a prelude to violence, each syllable dripping with contempt. "Blood is thicker than water, Eliza," chimed in Thomas, the youngest, with a sneer that would have made a Viking proud. "What kin are you to keep what belongs to us? Hand her over, and let's end this charade." The brothers advanced, their boots thudding against the wooden planks, each step a warning, a reminder of the bitter loyalty that bound them in a pact as old as the stones beneath their feet. Inside the house, the girl cowered in the corner, her eyes wide, darting between the door and Eliza, searching for solace in the face of encroaching danger. Eliza could feel the girl's fear like a cold hand on her heart. What choice did she have? Would she sacrifice the innocent to appease the hunger for vengeance that burned in her brothers-in-law's eyes? As the storm outside began to unleash its fury, the first drops of rain splattered against the parched earth, mixing with the dust and making the ground slick. Under the weight of the brothers' demand, tension hung heavy in the air. Eliza took a step forward, her heart pounding as she prepared to defend the girl with every ounce of strength she possessed. "You think you can scare me into giving her up? You don't understand what I'll do to protect her." The brothers exchanged another dark glance, the threat of violence palpable in the charged silence. And as thunder cracked overhead, the very air seemed to fold in on itself, holding its breath in anticipation. Would she stand firm against the tempest brewing both inside and out? Or would the wrath of the brothers force her hand? The moon hung low in the night sky, casting a pale glow over the widow's modest homestead, tinting the wooden walls with an ethereal silver. The stillness of the night was shattered by the distant sound of hooves, a slow, deliberate rhythm echoing against the rocky terrain. At that moment, the widow, Clara, sat by the window, her heart pounding like a war drum at the dread of what was approaching. She had done everything she could to protect the girl hidden in the attic, whose body was still bruised and battered from the beating she had received from the very men now riding towards her. What would she do when they arrived? The thought gnawed at her. How could she choose between her own safety and the freedom of a girl who had already suffered too much under their hand? As the shadows lengthened and the horses' breaths fogged in the chill of the night, Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Hiding the girl was a risk, but it was a risk she had chosen, one she had surrendered herself to when the battered child had knocked on her door, desperate for sanctuary. As the brothers dismounted, their figures loomed tall and imposing against the faint light. They were men of the land, kin to her late husband, and they carried with them a sense of entitlement that made her skin crawl. They had come looking for vengeance, their eyes darkened with anger and desperation. Clara felt the weight of the rifle resting against her thigh, a weapon meant for protection. But now it felt like a noose tightening around her throat. "Let's just get this over with," one of the brothers grumbled, his voice low and steady as he approached the door. The wood creaked under his heavy boots, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. "Clara!" He called, and the sound sliced through the stillness, a blade cutting through her resolve. "We know you've got her. Hand the girl over and we'll leave you be." Could there truly be a way to protect the innocent without losing everything? Clara's heart raced as she glanced up toward the attic, knowing the girl was listening, trembling with fear. The choice lay before her, heavy and suffocating. With the brothers demanding her compliance and the girl's life hanging in the balance, Clara's breath quickened. Would she betray her own safety to save a life she barely knew? The night held its breath, waiting for her decision. As the door shuddered under the weight of the brothers' fists, she felt the ground beneath her shift, every heartbeat whispering a question that echoed painfully in her chest. How far would a mother go to protect someone else's child? And as she grasped the rifle, she was acutely aware that this was the moment that would define her. Would she choose the girl, or would she choose her own life? The tension crackled like wildfire, and in that instant, everything hung in the balance. The night was a canvas of chaos, shadows swirling beneath the weight of a blood-red moon that seemed to glare down in judgment. The crackle of flames soared into the darkness, casting eerie, flickering shadows against the rugged terrain. Like wild beasts, the brothers stood before the inferno they had unleashed, their eyes wide with a mix of rage and satisfaction, while embers danced around them like lost souls seeking refuge. As the fire roared, licking the wooden beams of the widow's home, the scent of charred pine assaulted the air, a reminder of the life that had once thrived within those walls. Were they truly avengers, or mere fools blinded by wrath? The flames spat and hissed as if mocking their intent. But to the brothers, this was justice. A repayment for the perceived sins of a woman who had dared to defy their family's name. Inside, the widow clutched the girl, the beaten child she had hidden beneath the floorboards, her heart pounding in sync with the crackling timber outside. The flickering light illuminated the tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face, each droplet a silent prayer for safety. They could hear the distant shouts of the brothers, their laughter mingling with the rising smoke, a cruel symphony of vengeance that tore at her soul. Will they stop at nothing? The widow thought, her hands trembling as she gripped the girl's wrist, feeling the pulse of fear radiate between them. She urged the child towards the back door, the only escape from the hell that roared in front of them. The night air hit them like a cold dagger as they burst through the door, the heat of the blaze pushing them forward. Outside, the stars twinkled far above, indifferent to the turmoil below. With each step, the widow felt the weight of her choice hanging around her neck, a life sacrificed for another. The brothers turned to face the raging fire, their faces illuminated by the glow of their cruel handiwork. "Let it burn," one of them howled, the words echoing like a war cry in the night, a gruesome testament to their twisted sense of honor. In that fleeting moment, the widow and the girl fled into the darkness, each footfall a desperate plea for survival. But with every step, the flames behind them swallowed the memories they had built. The night offered no comfort, only the promise of uncertainty. As they ran deeper into the shadows, the widow couldn't shake the question that clawed at her mind. What would they find in the darkness that awaited them? And would it be worse than the flames they left behind? In the distance, the fire crackled, a haunting reminder of the life they had just lost. The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the unforgiving terrain. Dust and sweat mingled on the widow's brow as she pressed on, her heart pounding like a war drum. The girl, barely more than a child, stumbled beside her, her small feet unsteady on the rocky ground. They had left the safety of the cabin behind, and now faced the wild embrace of the wilderness. The weight of their flight felt like a shackle around the widow's chest, each step forward a reminder of the danger that nipped at their heels. Above them, a hawk circled, its keen eyes scanning the earth for signs of weakness. They were prey now, hunted by the widow's late husband's brothers, men who would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. The widow glanced back, half expecting to see a flash of a rifle or hear the taunting call of her pursuers echoing through the canyon. How long could they keep running like this, she wondered, her thoughts a jumble of fear and resolve. The terrain grew steeper, and she turned to the girl, whose face was pale with exhaustion. "We need to find shelter," she urged, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a cave just up ahead. We can rest there." The girl nodded, gripping the widow's hand as they hurried along the narrow trail. The cave loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, a mouth of stone that promised temporary solace from the sun and their pursuers. As they slipped inside, shadows enveloped them, and the weight of silence pressed down like a thick fog. The widow's heart raced with urgency. They had to be quick. Outside, the sounds of the brothers echoed through the canyon, laughter mingling with menacing threats. "You think they'll find us?" the girl whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The widow knelt down, pulling the girl close, her eyes scanning the cave's mouth for any sign of movement. "They're close, but they won't find us in here," she replied, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. Yet the question lingered in the air. Could they truly outsmart men who knew this land as well as their own skin? The cave felt like a tomb, and dread coiled around her heart like a serpent. As darkness settled, the widow listened intently, straining to hear the faintest sound of footfalls that could signal their discovery. Would they emerge from this darkness, or be swallowed whole by it? The night stretched on, thick with uncertainty, and the echo of their breaths became the only sound in the void. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the canyon, taunting them with the promise of freedom just beyond their reach. Would they survive the hunt, or would the brothers' fury unleash a reckoning that would seal their fates? The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a silver light across the desolate landscape. Dust swirled around the figures as they crested the ridge, their silhouettes stark against the night. Not far from the trail, a flicker of firelight danced between the gnarled trees, a beacon in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The crackle of flames whispered promises of warmth and safety, yet caution gripped their hearts. What if the very shadows that beckon us hold our doom? One of them pondered silently, each footstep heavy with doubt. As they approached, the figures by the fire became clearer. Roughened faces, weary eyes, and clothes patched with the remnants of a life once stable. Outcasts. Their hands bore the traces of labor, calluses, and scars telling stories of survival, while the cracked earth beneath them bore witness to the weary struggle we all know too well. One amongst the group held an old Viking axe, a relic of a time long past, its blade dulled but still glinting with the promise of protection. It was a reminder that strength sometimes lay not just in numbers, but in the stories we carry and the battles we've fought. "Who goes there?" a voice barked, sharp as a whip crack. The tension was palpable. The travelers exchanged glances, nervous but resolute. They had heard tales of such gatherings. Men and women banding together under the cloak of night, strangers united by desperation. Yet, could they trust these souls? Would the warmth of the fire be the warmth of a trap? "Come closer." The voice softened, but suspicion hovered like a specter. They stepped forward warily, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. "We've seen what's been happening out there. The fires, the blood. We're not your enemies. We're just trying to survive." The outcasts gestured toward a makeshift shelter, woven together from branches and tattered canvas, a sanctuary from the chaos that roamed the land like a hungry wolf. With darkness wrapping around them like a cloak, the travelers found themselves drawn into the circle, the warmth of the fire a tempting embrace. But in the flickering light, they could see the sharp edges of fear etched into the faces around them. Would they find allies in these shadows, or was this yet another illusion in a world steeped in betrayal? As the fire crackled and shadows danced, an unspoken question hung in the air. Who among them would betray their trust first? The night deepened, laden with secrets yet to surface. The sun dipped low in the dusky sky, painting the land in shades of burnt orange and deep purples, casting elongated shadows across the small, ramshackle home where the widow, Clara, had fought so many battles both within and without. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of the last remnants of a modest stew simmering on the wood stove, a comforting veil over the rawness of the evening. She sat at the rickety table, the flickering light of a single oil lamp casting trembling shadows on the walls that had witnessed her grief, her anger, and her resolve. Across from her, curled up on the worn floor, lay the girl she had hidden. A fragile creature, bruised and battered, yet alive and breathing, the flicker of hope she had thought extinguished. Clara glanced at the girl, the innocence of youth contrasting sharply with the darkness that had chased them both. What would you sacrifice to keep someone safe? The question echoed in Clara's mind like a battle cry, but it wasn't just for the girl. It was a reckoning of her own past, the ghosts of lost opportunities, and the haunting regret of love that had turned to ash. As she reached for the girl's tattered blanket, her fingers brushed against the sharp edge of a dagger she'd hidden beneath the table. A relic from a time long gone. A Viking blade inherited from her father, its hilt wrapped in worn leather, the blade still keen. It had once served as a symbol of strength, a reminder of her heritage. Now it was a tool of desperation. Would using it to protect this girl bring her peace? Or would it entangle her further into the web of violence that had already claimed so much? The decision loomed over her like the dark clouds gathering on the horizon, threatening another storm. What kind of woman was she willing to become? A protector who would draw blood if need be, or a coward who would let fear dictate her choices? Each life that clung to her heart seemed to pull her deeper into the weight of that question. The girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Clara felt that spark of maternal instinct surge within her, a primal urge to shield this child not just from physical harm, but from the emotional scars that threatened to shape her future. "You're safe here," Clara whispered, but even she could hear the tremor in her own voice, the uncertainty that lingered like a scent of smoke long after a fire had died. The door creaked, snapping Clara from her reverie. Footsteps crunched on the gravel outside, each sound heavy with foreboding. Were they here for the girl, or for her? She gripped the dagger tighter, feeling the familiar weight of her decision pressing against her chest. A gust of wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and in that moment she realized safety came at a price. But what was she willing to pay? Would it be her soul, her humanity, or something far worse? And just as that thought settled in her mind, the knock echoed, a sound that could shatter her resolve. A reminder that outside the fragile sanctuary, danger awaited, relentless and unyielding. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson as Clara stood at the edge of her property. The charred remains of her home smoldered softly, a cruel reminder of what was lost. But shadows were not the only things flickering in the evening light. A voice, deep and strong, broke through the silence, pulling her from the clutches of despair. "Clara!" called out Thomas, a burly ranch hand who had been one of the first to rally to her side after the fire. "You can't let them get away with this. We can take the fight to them." His hands rested on his hips, the roughened skin testament to years spent taming the wildland. "He's right," added Abigail, a fierce woman who had fought her own battles against prejudice in the town. "You need to gather the others. We can't let those men think they've won." Her voice was steady, but Clara could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. The weight of their collective pasts hung heavy in the air. Clara clenched her jaw, a sharp resolve replacing the grief that had swirled in her chest. How many times had she been forced to bury her feelings in favor of survival? This time, it was different. They were not just fighting for her home. They were fighting for their dignity, their futures. Together, they would become a force against the brothers who had taken everything. "All right, we need a plan," Clara declared, her voice gaining strength. "We meet at the creek under the moonlight. Everyone brings what they can, tools, weapons, anything that can help." The group nodded, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Each one knew the risk, but the fire in their hearts burned brighter than fear. That night, Clara gathered her allies by the shimmering waters of the creek. Their faces illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps. They exchanged ideas, mapping the terrain around the brothers' hideout. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. What if they could create a diversion? A fire near the barn could draw the brothers out, leaving their cabin vulnerable. But could they trust their plan to hold? Would the shadows of their pasts haunt them as they faced the brothers? The tension in the air crackled like the dry branches beneath their feet. As the night deepened, Clara felt a strange mix of hope and dread. This was not merely about reclaiming land. It was about reclaiming her spirit. Yet, as she looked around at the determined faces of her allies, she wondered, could they truly withstand the storm that was coming? Tomorrow would show them all. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange haze across the landscape as Clara stood at the edge of her property. The wind howled through the barren trees, whipping her hair around her face like the ghosts of the past trying to pull her back. She clutched the rifle tightly, its cold metal pressing into her palm, grounding her in the moment. Did she have the strength to face the demons that rode in on horseback? From the ridge, the silhouettes of her late husband's brothers emerged, their figures framed against the dying light, harbingers of conflict and resentment. Each horse's hoofbeat felt like a drumbeat, echoing the pulse of her heart. They had been the shadows lurking behind her grief, their laughter ringing out at her husband's funeral, their eyes glittering with a mixture of pity and disdain. Now the tension thickened in the air, sharp as the edge of a Viking axe, both a weapon and a symbol of protection. "Clara!" one of them shouted, a sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. "You think you can hide behind that gun? You truly believe you can keep what's ours away from us?" She stepped forward, her breath forming clouds in the crisp evening air. "Your brother left this land to me. Your threats mean nothing." But did they ever really mean nothing? The weight of the past bore down on her, memories of shared laughter and fights that echoed through those very walls. She felt the ghosts of their shared history swirling around her, each painful moment a brick in the wall between them. The brothers pulled their horses to a halt, eyes narrowing, assessing her resolve. Their presence dripped with entitlement, as if the land had always belonged to them alone. Inside her, anger coiled, hot and fierce. "You think this is about land. It's about respect." A chuckle escaped one of the brothers, rich with condescension. "Respect? You think the likes of you deserve respect?" Clara's grip tightened on the rifle, her knuckles white against the fading light. "I'm not afraid of you." She fought to suppress the fear clawing at her insides. She couldn't let it show. But behind that bravado, an unsettling question lingered. Would she be able to protect the life she'd built? Or would she lose it all again, like a leaf blown away by a cruel autumn wind? The horizon darkened, shadows stretching like ghosts across the land, as Clara stood alone against the tide of her past. With each heartbeat, the world narrowed, resolving into the thunderous roar of impending violence. The moment hung in the air, pregnant with unresolved tension as the brothers advanced. Was this how it would end? Her standing firm while everything she loved burned around her? The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the charred remains of the widow's homestead. Blackened wood stood like sentinels against the crimson horizon, a graveyard of dreams and family ties, burnt to ash in the fire of desperation. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air, coiling into the lungs of those who dared to breathe. The widow, Miriam, stood at the threshold of what was once her life, her heart heavy like the thick air around her. Not far off, the girl, Rosie, barely 13, clutched a worn leather satchel against her chest, the only remnant of her childhood that had not been consumed by the flames. Inside lay a few precious keepsakes, a silver locket, a tattered book of stories, and a handful of dried wildflowers. Each item was a memory, fragile and priceless. Yet now they felt like stones dragging her deeper into an abyss of grief and guilt. Is the price of survival always steep? She pondered silently, her gaze wandering from the smoldering rubble to the vast expanse of the prairie stretching endlessly before them. Together, they stood in silence, their minds racing through the events that had brought them to this moment, the beating, the hiding, and the terrifying escape from the clutches of the widow's husband's brothers. They had acted out of fear and love, intertwining those emotions like the threads of a Viking's tapestry, where every thread told a story of loss and valor. Did they have the strength to carry this burden, knowing it came at such a high cost? In the distance, a hawk circled ominously, its sharp cries echoing the turmoil in their hearts. The horizon felt like a promise, but also a threat, a reminder that freedom often tasted bitter. Each step they could take away from the ashes was a step toward an uncertain future. But what awaited them out there among the wilds? Would they find solace or just another kind of suffering? As the wind picked up, swirling the dust and ash around them, Miriam turned to Rosie with a steadfast look, one that spoke of resilience forged in the fires of despair. "We'll rebuild," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "We always do." But deep down, they both knew they were standing on the precipice of a new life, one that carried the weight of their choices. The haunting question remained: could they ever find peace in the chaos that lay ahead? And as night began to swallow the remnants of the day, the flickering stars above whispered secrets of the past, leaving the two women to wonder. What cost would they truly pay for their freedom? The sun broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the charred remains of the widow's home, its skeleton standing stark against the brightening sky. Each beam seemed to whisper promises of renewal. A gentle breeze stirred the ashes, lifting them into the air like forgotten memories, leaving behind the ghosts of yesterday. With the brothers gone, a frail sense of freedom beckoned. Miriam stood at the edge of the ruins, her heart a tumultuous storm. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, a stark contrast to the chill of despair that had hung over her since the fire. Beside her, young Clara, a girl not yet fully formed into a woman, picked through the remnants, uncovering shards of pottery and frayed scraps of fabric, remnants of the life that had once been. "Do you think we can ever make it whole again?" Miriam asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Clara looked up, her eyes glinting with a mixture of defiance and hope. "We can try," she replied, her fingers brushing against the earth as if it held the key to their future. Together, they began to gather what they could, salvaging bits of their past to forge their future. The essence of Viking resilience coursed through Miriam's veins, a legacy of her forebears who had voyaged across treacherous seas to carve out a new existence. They had learned to adapt, to thrive amid adversity, and today, she and Clara would do the same. As they worked side by side, the widow felt a bond blossoming between them, a shared strength emanating from their scars. They fashioned makeshift tools from the debris, creating a small garden plot where the homes used to stand. Every seed they planted echoed with the hope of rebirth, each sprout a promise of life against the backdrop of loss. But amidst this burgeoning connection, Miriam often glanced at Clara's face, searching for hints of lingering fear or doubt. What haunted the girl's heart in the silence? The past always lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the chaos that had consumed their lives. Could they truly escape it? Or was it destined to follow them? As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over their new patch of earth, Miriam took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day settle around her shoulders. They had survived the worst, and yet a new journey lay before them, filled with uncertainty. Would they find the strength to believe in a future? Or would the echoes of the past continue to cloud their path? The garden thrived under their care, but in the stillness of the twilight, an unspoken worry hung between them. What if the past was not yet finished with them? As dawn broke over the horizon, the first light spilled across the hills like liquid gold, illuminating the silent aftermath of the night. In the dim morning glow, the remnants of the widow's homestead stood resolute against the vast expanse of the prairie, a testament to endurance. Smoke still curled lazily from the remnants of the previous night's fire, a bitter reminder of the chaos that had erupted just hours before. The air was thick with the smell of charred wood and the remnants of fear, a blend that hung heavy against the backdrop of the awakening land. The widow emerged from the crumbling structure, her silhouette stark against the lightening sky. She moved with a careful grace, her hands trembling slightly as they brushed over the rough-hewn timber of the porch, rough like the calluses on her palms. Was it the memory of her husband's warm touch she felt in the wood, or the crushing weight of loss? As she stepped down onto the dirt, a single crow called out overhead, slicing through the fragile silence. The cry echoed in her chest, a reminder that life continued even when it felt like her world had shattered. In the distance, the hills rolled like waves, their crests dancing in the gentle breeze. She could almost hear the whispers of her ancestors, tales of warriors who had once roamed these lands long before the settlers arrived. They fought not just for territory, but for legacy, much like her own struggle now. The weight of inheritance lay heavy on her soul, and she wondered if the blood of those past warriors coursed through her veins, urging her to stand firm in the face of adversity. The widow gathered her breath as she surveyed the remnants of her life. The land stretched out before her, an endless expanse of possibility and pain intertwined. She needed to rebuild, not just the homestead, but her very spirit. But how could she forge a future while carrying the ghosts of her past? Each step toward the barn felt like a journey through a battlefield, where every nail she pounded echoed with memories of laughter and sorrow. As she approached the barn door, she hesitated for a moment, letting the weight of her fears settle on her shoulders. It was not just the physical act of rebuilding that terrified her. It was the emotional toll of confronting what lay beneath the surface. Would the scars of her experiences ever truly heal? Or would they remain, permanently etched into her being like the carvings on ancient Viking stones, speaking of victories and losses long forgotten? With a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy door. The darkness inside felt alive, a contrast to the bright morning outside, and she stepped in to face her past head-on. The air was cooler, tinged with the scent of hay and loneliness, and in that moment she wondered, could she truly honor her past, or was she destined to be swallowed by it? The barn loomed before her like a guardian of her memories, and as she stood there, heart racing, she realized that the choices she made now would define her legacy. Would she rise from the ashes, or let herself be consumed by the weight of what once was? The answer lingered like a whisper, teasing her with the promise of hope, or despair. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the charred remains of the cabin. The widow, her hair tousled by the wind, stood at the edge of the blackened earth, her heartbeat steadying as the acrid smell of smoke faded with the evening breeze. Beside her, the girl watched, eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, a mixture of orange and hope. Together, they were facing a horizon that stretched infinitely before them, where the hills rolled like waves in a vast ocean. As they took a step forward, the widow turned to the girl, her voice a whisper against the silence. What will we make of this new beginning? It was a question that hung like the evening fog, thick with possibility and uncertainty. The girl furrowed her brow, contemplating the weight of that query, for it was more than just a future they were discussing. It was a chance to rewrite their destinies. With each step they took away from the ruins of grief and violence, the widow felt the burden of her past fall away. The earth beneath her boots was firm, as if promising stability, and each clump of dirt carried stories of resilience. She thought of her ancestors, those Viking warriors who had braved the seas for a better life, not unlike what they were attempting now. When faced with the unknown, had they ever felt this mix of dread and exhilaration? The girl picked up a small stone, smoothing its surface with her fingers, contemplating how it was once part of the world around them. "Will we be strong enough?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper, a tremor of uncertainty threading through her words. The widow knelt beside her, taking the stone from her hand, feeling its solidity, its promise. "Strength is not about never falling, but always rising," she replied, her heart swelling with a bittersweet pride. As they moved past the remnants of the home, the widow caught sight of the wildflowers blooming defiantly in the cracks of the earth, bright bursts of color against the backdrop of ash. They were a reminder of life's tenacity, and for the first time since the fire, she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Nature had a way of pushing through, of flourishing, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. "What if we stumble?" the girl asked, glancing back at the devastation they were leaving behind. The widow smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from the girl's face. "Then we simply get back up. Together." Their laughter mingled with the wind, carrying away the remnants of sorrow as they stepped into the unknown. Yet, even as they walked forward, shadows lingered in the corners of their hearts, reminding them that freedom, too, came with its own set of dangers. As they reached the rise of the hill, the vast landscape unfurling before them, the widow couldn't help but wonder. Was the future truly paved with hope? Or would the specters of their past come to haunt them anew? The weight of uncharted roads loomed ahead, and while they embraced their newfound freedom, an echo of uncertainty hung in the air, whispering of the challenges yet to come. Would they have the courage to face them?